750,000 people are reported missing in the United States every year. A lot of people are convinced that the missing persons issue is a much bigger problem than the media would lead you to believe. Usually, people that are reported missing are found within a few hours or a few days, and often they're found still alive. However, within a specific category of missing persons cases, there seems to be a very strange phenomenon where people will go missing for days, weeks, months, or even years at a time before being found, which should be impossible in a lot of those cases. Because oftentimes those remains will appear in an area that was searched multiple times by rescue teams and law enforcement, or the remains will be found so far away that there's no possible explanation for how the victim could have traveled that far while they were still alive. And it's not uncommon in this particular category of missing person cases to find someone with strange injuries or to be missing parts of their clothing, especially their shoes. Or people will go missing without a trace as if they were plucked off of the earth by an alien. This seemingly supernatural cause for missing people is a prevalent issue in Canada, the United States, and Australia, where people appear to go missing under strange circumstances and aren't found again until years later, well within the established search area, or they're never found at all, not even evidence that they were even at the park in the first place, as if they never existed. I would never have noticed this pattern for myself if it weren't for the rigorous work done by David Paulides, a retired police officer that dedicated himself to exposing this phenomenon in a book series he calls Missing 411.
Especially when you start to pair them all together, it sounds like there's a pattern, some sort of magician making people disappear and reappear in different places, abducting them and making them vanish from the face of the earth.
The first time I heard about this issue was on the Coast to Coast radio show when he did an interview with Art Bell.
And I explained all the issues I'd had with the Park Service and how they had obstructed, delayed, done everything they could. And I said, how do you account for that? He says, a complete lack of integrity. He goes, Dave, that's the way the Park Service works.
The question why is it's corrupt?
It's just the way they do business. And he said, you're never probably going to get that information out of them regarding missing people because they don't want you to have it.
But David Paulides has given a number of talks at different UFO and Bigfoot conventions, as well as a litany of podcasts and the like. One of the very first tinfoil helmet style videos that I ever did on this channel was about the Missing 411, where I read articles about missing people that I felt fit the Missing 411 criteria, including an extremely infamous case that David Paulides included in his first documentary.
Even though there is this strange snake oil quality to David Paulides' work, and any approval that I give of his research, I have to add an asterisk. He might be bullshitting us, or a disinfo agent or something. I don't know what the hell's going on. David is unfortunately the main authority on this right now. In his 8 years, he has created 8 books and 2 documentaries. I just hope that he's not just adding confusion, trying to tie together a bunch of diverse cases into one crazy conspiracy theory to draw attention away from a big problem in national parks.
I had wanted to interview David Paulides for a really long time on my channel. I'd emailed him several times, and I even tried to contact him through his sketchy website that looks like it's from 1998. But I never got a response. Then randomly one day out of the blue, I get an email from him, and at first I get excited because I think that we're gonna have some fun having an interview talking about these cases together. But then I ended up shocked when I read the email where he's antagonistically threatening to sue me for using the image of his movie poster in my thumbnail. So I immediately changed the thumbnail, and I email him back apologetically explaining that I meant no harm by it, and in fact I'm a huge fan of his, and I've been trying to get him on my channel for a long time for an interview. But he responded to me by threatening to go after whatever earnings I had made from using his poster in my thumbnail. Even after I capitulated to his demands and apologized, he still threatened me like a bully. This exchange completely shocked me out of my fascination with David's work. I used to be so cool about it. I felt like I was being really fair about his work. I used to say that even though he sells this at UFO conventions and Bigfoot conferences and stuff, that my heart of hearts wanted to believe that he was doing this for the right reason. He was comparing these missing persons cases to supernatural events as a way to subtly expose police corruption.
So I would like to believe in my heart of hearts that he's a cop. Okay, he's an ex-police officer. He's using cop language, very lawyery way to sort of describe the circumstances of the case. And even though he's presenting it to like Bigfoot communities and UFO communities, if you listen close to the way he's presenting it, if you know that he's using cop talk, then you know what he's actually saying, if you read between the lines, is that this is a murder case. The police believe this was murder. So Anthony Anadero is a really good example of that.
David would even often say that he's not doing what he does for profit. He claims he doesn't even monetize his YouTube channel. And he really just wants to spread the truth to help the families find closure. But after this email exchange, I couldn't help but conclude that David is entirely insincere about his motivation for doing this. It's hard to believe that he actually cares about the families of these victims, and he's almost certainly lying when he says he's trying to find the truth. I mean, here I am spreading the word of this phenomenon, trying to encourage my audience to think about this for themselves, investigate, and help find closure for the victims. And I'm even promoting his brand and encouraging people to go buy his books and watch his films. But David's over here bitching that my video made a little bit of money off of talking about this. That makes no sense at all. Especially considering how many thousands of other YouTubers have made this exact same content. There's no way he's harassing me personally over this, right? There are also countless online communities of sleuthers and detectives that take up cold cases and work together to try to rehash all the details to see if they can't find a better answer than what the police or investigators found. They'll do this for missing people's cases, they'll do this for unsolved murders, and these online communities have actually solved multiple cold cases this way, helping reveal the truth about what happened and find closure for the surviving family members. So that's why I'm shocked that David chose to be a cop to me specifically about this. Why bully me? I don't think it was because I used his image. I think I probably said something in my video that really pissed him off. Something I did made him very uncomfortable. And I also started to get the feeling that cops don't really like these online sleuther communities very much. They don't like the way that people poke holes in their stories. But I'm really glad that this happened to me, because this time that I've had to reflect on this exchange has totally recontextualized the missing 411 phenomenon for me. I went through all 3 videos that I made on the missing 411 phenomenon to see what it was that I said that probably pissed David off. And I realized that I was probably right to question the motivations and the actions of the police involvement in these missing people's cases. And I know that I said this before, but I am confident now that the missing 411 phenomenon is simply a magic trick. And this supernatural mystery is just a lie to keep us all looking in the wrong direction to find answers. So I wondered what would happen if I made this follow-up video that focused on some of the aspects of the missing 411 phenomenon that I find a little bit dubious. So as far as the community is concerned, a missing 411 case is any missing persons case that is strange enough or unexplainable enough to seem to require some kind of supernatural explanation. There are a lot of repeating factors, several patterns within these missing people's cases, such as bizarre behavior from the victim in their final moments. And you'll see these patterns show up again and again in each of these cases. Far too many patterns to list them all in this video. You sort of have to read a bunch of the cases to notice this for yourself. And the problem is that far too many people seem all too willing to believe that these patterns are representative of something supernatural happening out in the national parks of North America. And David Paulides is one of these people, apparently. For example, in his second film about old men that went missing while hunting alone in the woods, he spends the last 15 or 20 minutes of the film talking about a cloaked predator creature that could be stalking people.
At the end, he has some weird shit where a lady is like, I saw a predator in the trees and it was all shimmery and I could see through it like it was cloaked. Then they show a map of the United States and like the cloak thing going across the map, and they're like, all of these missing people might be going into other dimensions or some shit, and it's just like insulting, horrendously insulting.
David's also pushed this theory on his YouTube channel as well. I heard him tell a story of a predator stalking some man after he just got out of his truck, and then the predator ran away when he saw that the man was willing to defend himself. What a weird story.
The thing about a magic trick is it's about deceiving the audience's perception of what's happening. And a really good magician will even let the audience think that the deception is happening at a different point in the trick that it's actually happening. But usually, right from the very beginning, the premise that you've been sold by the magician is a complete lie, and nothing that actually happened in the trick was actually happening the way you thought it was. And these Mystery 411 cases, when they're told the way that David Paulides tells them, it sort of reminds me of a magic trick, because you might think that the mystery is happening behind the parent's back, or in a way that can't be seen or recorded or understood. David will tie those mysterious, maybe it's Bigfoot cases, in with cases that are clearly murder or gross negligence on somebody's part, whether it be the police or the parents or the guardian or friends or whoever was there.
Or he's also read viewer stories on his channel insisting on the existence of Sasquatch, or even viewer stories about interdimensional portals that must be responsible for these disappearances.
He was just talking about an ex-police officer who got fired because he was looking into police corruption in his own department. And then after he was fired, he sued and got money, but it was after his police department had harassed him for a very long time, and the officers harassed him, and then he turns up missing all of a sudden. Then David starts talking about how police corruption is bad, and then immediately goes into something crazy here.
When police and deputies and law enforcement get in a position where they know something internally is going on, and the organization retaliates against you for going to another law enforcement organization to report it, that is troublesome. And that is wrong. So, 2 cases within 15 miles of each other, neither person's been found. Hopefully, Srinivas and Jonathan's case will eventually be solved. Now to the letters. First one, David, greetings, hope all is well with you and your family. Regarding weather events after a disappearance, I wanted to mention that if you have ever watched videos regarding Montauk, New York time travel project, the mention was made that each time they opened a portal, that bad weather would ensue immediately afterward. Al Bielek was another member, had the same story as the others in the groups, and said that he was...
Yeah, see, I think that proves my point. That he is intentionally mixing in bad cases and crazy cases with real ones.
And he would read these stories dead ass, completely seriously, right before reading a story about a legitimately tragic missing persons case. I'm still pretty convinced that David doesn't believe any of these stories himself, but I've since become convinced that he's actually trying to get us to believe them. David very clearly wants us to conflate the very real phenomenon of missing people with the supernatural. Again, the vast majority of these missing people's cases are genuine tragedies that deserve to be discussed with empathy and sympathy towards the subject. Meanwhile, he's at Bigfoot and UFO conventions trying to tell people that it's fucking Bigfoot doing it. By that very virtue, I have to conclude that David Paulides is refusing to take this subject seriously. He's actively choosing to not take the tragic subject of losing a loved one with the proper respect.
I've often gotten the question from viewers, why don't you cover any paranormal missing persons cases? My answer is, I do. Almost every case presented on this channel is considered a missing 411 case, which is to say it is considered by some people to be, in some way, unexplainable, or possibly paranormal. How is it my fault that when you look at all of the facts of a case, it doesn't seem paranormal anymore? The problem with touching on a paranormal explanation is that it has no limits. Was it Bigfoot? UFO abduction? A portal to another realm? Or a purple people eater? Could be all of the above, I suppose. In that sense, a paranormal explanation might as well just be the equivalent of we have no idea what happened.
And I personally feel that taking the genuine real-world tragedy of losing a loved one and conflating that with the novelty of the supernatural is a complete insult. Not just to the families, but those of us that actually want to find the answers to these questions. And the people that have actually dumped money on getting copies of these books. And the scariest part is by selling these stories to the supernatural community, to Bigfoot and UFO enthusiasts, he's basically giving ownership of the narratives of these stories to those supernatural communities, making it goddamn near impossible to have a serious conversation about these things. It's saturating the algorithm with supernatural explanations for explainable normal events. Whenever you bring any of these cases up, the overwhelming consensus in the comments very quickly becomes the necessity that it must be Bigfoot or it must be aliens doing this. And David has been very clever and careful not to explicitly push these theories as his own thoughts. He'll either read other people's comments or he'll take comments and suggest that, yeah, that could be an explanation. Yeah, it could be Bigfoot. Yeah, that might be what it is. So even though he doesn't seem to personally believe those ideas or ever push them himself, he does certainly give those theories a lot more airtime and energy than any more reasonable theories. It just seems like a weird thing for a cop to spend so much time talking about mysteries and never discussing logical explanations for them. And the scary thing is that a lot of these cases seem so mysterious because the reporting done on them is minimal. There's almost no information about who it was that went missing, where or when, and all those pieces had to be put together afterwards, making it goddamn near impossible to understand what actually happened. Not every case is the same, obviously. There's a litany of different patterns and attitudes that all get compressed into the missing 411 category, but there's a handful of repeating types of cases that I feel are extremely explainable, and there are a ton of logical, plausible explanations for how these people could have gone missing in the way that they did. And there's a handful of reasons that someone's remains would turn up months or years later in an area that had already been searched. First of all, it's really important to point out that being a search and rescue worker is not at all a glamorous job, and it's not described as a coveted position by those who choose to wear a uniform. As you can imagine, it's really hard to get motivated to spend days or weeks at a time wandering through the woods looking for something, knowing that you're not going to find anything. That part of the experience alone could be very defeating. And all too often, they're told to gear up and head out into the woods to look for some kid that just ends up jumping out of the tree line at the last second. That would make me angry. And as a rescue worker, even if you do end up finding something, chances are that the scene you come across is going to give you PTSD. There's also a lot of these cases that are misreported by the police or under-investigated during the crucial hours of the search, simply because the rescue teams are fatigued or under-motivated, or they're not even really convinced that the missing person is in any real danger, and they've simply just wandered off into the woods to enjoy some solitude. Because that happens pretty often. Sometimes it's not even until after the search has already ended that the seriousness of the situation actually sinks in. People don't always know exactly how bad it really is until it's all played out. And also, a lot of these cases happened a long time ago, before there was any standardized criteria on how to handle cases like this. So in a lot of these cases, they simply didn't even do the work to try to figure out what happened. They simply wrote down in a report, so-and-so went missing, the end. And that's it. Sometimes when somebody goes missing, nature is to blame. There's an endless collection of cracks, crevices, and holes that a hiker or a wilderness survivor can fall into.
The search for Greg Monroe could very easily have ended without success, and today we would say that he vanished without a trace, that his disappearance is mysterious and unexplained. And without knowing what actually happened to Greg, I suppose all of those things would be true. I would encourage you to think about this scenario. Greg Monroe, he arrives in the desert, sets up camp, and almost immediately disappears. The area is open, mostly flat, with some rocks and brush. What do you think could have happened to make him disappear in an area like this? I suppose you could say that he walked outside the search area and got lost, and died somewhere far away. But I'm sure if Greg was never found, some people would look at this situation and see it as something paranormal. a man who disappeared in the desert where there was nowhere for him to go. Fortunately, we do know what happened to Greg Monroe, and most people would probably never guess what the answer is. On November 7th, a searcher from Orange County was scouring the brushland about half a mile from Greg's campsite when they had a very close call. In front of the searcher, and completely covered by the heavy brush, was a 30-inch by 30-inch hole in the ground. The hole turned out to be a very old well shaft that was forgotten and overgrown by the surrounding brushland. It was later determined that the well was 40 feet deep and half full of water, but at the bottom was the body of Greg Monroe. It appears that Greg was scouting the terrain around his campsite shortly after his arrival in the area. As he wandered around, he fell right into the well shaft that was near impossible to see. Once Greg was in the well, there was no way he could have gotten out.
And even if you have your entire rescue crew check that specific area, it can be really easy to miss a tiny feature like that.
It's really a sad and tragic accident to happen to anyone, but Greg's story illustrates a point that sometimes the explanation for an unusual disappearance is something that you may not have considered before. Most people who walk around in places like the Mojave National Preserve probably don't think that the next step they take might send them tumbling down a 40-foot well shaft. And looking at the pictures of this shaft, you can see that if searchers had not discovered and cleared the brush from this well, Greg Monroe may never have been found. His name could have been added to the list of disappearances that have no obvious explanation, and would probably be added to the list of missing 411 cases.
I mean, think about it. The missing person didn't see that hole, and they were standing right on top of it. How could you expect a rescue worker to notice that unless they fall into it as well? Sometimes a feature like that doesn't get noticed unless the rescue workers are extremely lucky or thorough. Also, rock slides, landslides, and avalanches are all too common in the mountains. And sometimes a body can go missing forever simply because a rock landed on top of it.
Raymond Jones was someone who, for 53 years, was considered an individual who vanished without a trace. He disappeared one day, a thorough search turned up absolutely nothing. He just vanished. And then one day he is found. The hunter who discovered Raymond's remains noticed layers of slab rock in the cliff above, and believed that Raymond may have been trying to scale the cliff when a piece of rock broke off and crushed him. The rock on top of Raymond appeared to match the rock that made up the cliff face. The sheriff didn't seem to advance many theories other than to say he most likely fell. I think they're all probably on the right track. The evidence would seem to be pretty clear that Raymond was crushed by a rather large piece of rock. What is up for debate is how that rock fell on Raymond. When it fell, it likely killed him rather quickly. When the search occurred, I doubt he was still alive or able to call out to anyone. In fact, most of his body was probably hidden under the rock. Because of this, I think it's maybe not so surprising after all that the searchers were unable to find him. You would probably have to walk very close to his location to even see him. When theorizing about what could have happened to Raymond, I doubt many people even considered that he was crushed by a large rock. Again, sometimes the explanation for a case can be relatively simple.
And another major reason that some of these cases can seem so elusive and the behavior of the victim can seem so illogical is because the reason they went missing is that they wanted to be missing. They wanted to vanish, or they wanted to be unalive. And even if the rescue workers or the police figure out that that's what happened, there are still a ton of reasons why they wouldn't communicate to the public that that was the cause of death. For one, even in a case where it's the most likely explanation, the police don't really find sufficient evidence or reason to believe that the victim would take their own life. And also, giving that answer to a grieving spouse or family member is just going to dishonor the memory of that missing person and bring up too many questions about their mental health that'll be uncomfortable to discuss. And also, a family is very unlikely to suggest that as a possibility because it also makes implications about the quality of the time that that person spends with their family. I mean, a lot of these people are already avid outdoors people, avid campers, avid hikers, or outdoor survivors. So they already have the disposition to spend a lot of time out in the wilderness and completely detach and dissociate from society. I mean, usually those people have families that they could be spending time with instead, but are choosing to be in the woods. And those families would always suggest that there's no reason to believe that that person would harm themselves. But that's just what people want to believe about their loved ones because they don't want to have to own up to their own dysfunction. They don't want to own up to the role that they may have played in causing their son or daughter to do something so drastic. Like the film Into the Wild, a lot of these enthusiasts are trying to escape their overbearing, toxic family that's crushing their soul. When you're saying that someone unalived themselves, you're saying that they hated their lives so much that they wanted to end it. you're implying a lot of things. Like that their family was so awful and detached from reality that they didn't understand their son or daughter's mental condition. They pretty much contributed to the victim's decision to end everything. Basically, you could be implicating an entire family or stirring up some hidden family drama you don't know about, and that's not a comfortable thing for law enforcement or rescue workers to do, unless they have no other choice. But a lot of these cases, I'm convinced, are just murder. Period. I think that there's some sort of a sick game being played out in the national parks where people are knowingly and willingly exploiting loopholes that allow them to disappear members of their friends or families that they don't like or that are burdensome. And the specific rules involved in wilderness searches within the national parks don't really allow rescue workers or law enforcement to make too many accusations or assertions that go outside of the accepted narratives.
And the thing is, if police can't find enough evidence to lay charges, then they can't really just come out and say, this guy's a suspect. In most of these cases, they can't even find enough evidence to postulate that it might be murder. In fact, when people are missing in national parks, when police forces enter that national park, they then are essentially entering a different jurisdiction. National parks are like their own counties. Missing persons cases are just considered missing persons cases until any other evidence is found. And because we're talking about the vast, giant, immaculate wilderness, what evidence is there to find? A parent can say, this is the last place I saw my son alive. But that doesn't have to be true for the police to have to accept that as true.
And when there's no body and an infinitely large park that's impossible to find fingerprints or DNA evidence, there's no way you can drum up that evidence to make that assertion. So you're not even allowed to officially suspect foul play at all. And you just have to leave it at that. No foul play suspected, cause of disappearance unknown. That sucks.
So essentially, there's this secret, unspoken rule that you can disappear people in a national park and get away with it. And that's the uncomfortable truth about this whole.
Allegedly.
And there's a similar pattern I've noticed that I'm pretty sure are elderly, sick, terminally ill people that are being honor killed or intentionally euthanized by friends or family. David's second film seems to be focusing on those types of stories. Elderly hunters that were experts in the woods disappeared completely without a trace. No remains ever found. I know that sounds crazy, but there's a ton of cases where I feel like that's the only logical explanation. I even linked a video from Missing Enigma in the description where he goes over a case where I feel like that has to be what happened.
Carl Landers was 69 years old in 1999. He was fit and passionate about hiking and climbing. Carl was retired from the air conditioning industry and living in Orinda, California with his wife, Bobby Landers, who is also the former mayor of Orinda.
This might also be a good time to point out that a lot of these missing 411 cases involve individuals that are wealthy, really connected or involved with their community, or exceptional individuals that are revered by everyone. For like a second, I thought that meant that maybe those people were being targeted by some group that is jealous of them or sees them as a threat. But in reality, the fact that they're wealthy or connected people really just makes it that much more likely that the police are not going to honestly report this to the public.
Carl was going on this hike with two close friends, Barry Gilmore and Milt Gaines. Together, the three men had been on around 25 hikes together in the past 10 years. He was a stubborn man, and when he set a goal, he hated to fail to achieve it. Because of this, he was extra determined to make this second hike up Mount Shasta a success.
That's enough to make someone want to keep their mouth shut. You say the wrong thing and it can ruin your career.
Sergeant Nicholson told the other deputies that Milt and Barry were currently hiking on the mountain looking for Carl, and that he had no reason to believe they were involved in any kind of foul play. After their evaluation, the deputies also made the same assessment. No foul play detected. Interviews were conducted on May 28th as a way to help positively rule out any possibility of foul play. Their first interview was with Carl's wife, Bobby Landers, at the Weed Rest area. They informed her at the time that they had no reason to suspect foul play. They asked her some personal questions that are typical of this kind of situation. How long had she been married to Carl? 44 years. Had there ever been any affairs during their marriage? No. Were they having any financial difficulties? No. Did Carl have any enemies or any problems with anyone? No on both counts. They asked Bobby if Carl was physically fit and all right before going on this trip, and she said that he told her he wasn't feeling 100%, but he was going anyway. Detectives then talked to Carl's daughter-in-law. They asked her the same questions and they got the same answers. They moved on to Carl's daughter and again got the same answers. She said that Carl was in great shape and he worked out all the time. She said that he seemed to be happy. Both of her parents were involved in their community and were very well liked.
It's very obvious when you listen to the details of this story, even the way that Missing Enigma tells it as a possible supernatural case. It seems really obvious to me that this guy was old and probably sick, and his friends intentionally disappeared him as a way to honorably euthanize him in his time of need. Better to go off in a blaze of glory in a mountain and sort of just disappear from existence than it is to die slowly in pain, withered away as an old man in a bed. Their whole group spent 3 days on the mountain before finally turning around and going back to their vehicle. But everything that happens on day 3 of their story is a total chaotic blur. It sounds like it's all made up. According to the official story, after they broke camp at the second site, they spent the whole 3rd day trying to get a little bit higher up the mountain, and they separated. And that's when they lost track of their older friend.
Perhaps the most baffling part of the Carl Landers case comes when you really understand the location where he disappeared. The reality of this situation is best viewed from above. The way to Lake Helen from 50/50 is pretty clear in terms of sight lines. You're going from one outcropping to the next. Always keep in mind that Carl was not feeling well and moving extremely slow. His hiking partners were easily outpacing him. We know that Carl left 50/50 sometime between 9 and 9:45 a.m. As Milt said, he would walk 5 steps and rest. He was moving very slow. Milt didn't start up the mountain until around 10 a.m. When he did, he quickly overtook Barry, who had a 15-minute head start. So Milt could move pretty fast. How far could Carl have got with his 1-hour head start? He's moving at a snail's pace, he's not feeling well. Carl had to go up a steep 900 feet in elevation. There is likely no way he could have done this before Milt caught up to him. And even if Carl could do it, he knew that he needed to stop and wait at Lake Helen. And wouldn't he have needed a break by that point? None of it really makes any sense when you look at it.
And then eventually they tell the park staff that they can't find their friend. They think that he's wandered up in a certain direction, but they can't find any conclusive stories of anybody seeing him on the way up to the mountain. But in reality, by the time they told park staff that their friend was missing, he was probably already dead for a whole day and his body had been removed from the park by some third party.
Detectives asked the men if they thought that anyone could have done anything to Carl, and they said no. Both men said that the area is so wide open that there were so many people on the mountain, someone would have had to have seen something. With all of the people coming and going constantly, someone would have noticed Carl being attacked on the mountain. Milt Gaines would later say that whatever happened to Carl, it was beyond his understanding. Detectives note that both Barry and Milt seemed very concerned and upset about their friend during the interview, with both of them feeling a great deal of responsibility for Carl being missing.
And to further solidify that theory, the police in charge of the rescue operation completely misreported the location of their second campsite.
Sergeant Nicholson relayed the story of how Carl became lost on the mountain to the other deputies, and somehow he has a key detail completely wrong. Sergeant Nicholson told them that the trio of hikers arrived at the Sierra Club cabin on May 21st and stayed the night there. Then, in the morning, Carl went on ahead while the others broke camp. As we already know, the group stayed that night at 50/50, almost 1,700 feet higher on the mountain. Had Carl last been seen at Horse Camp, that would have changed the search drastically. The question is, why would a sergeant with the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office, a man who was supposedly overseeing search operations from the Weed Airport, be so wrong about where Carl was last seen? Remember, this is already 4 days into the search. Most everyone working on this SAR should have known where Carl was last seen. I find this part of the report quite concerning.
And he also chose a search region that was nowhere near where he was last seen alive.
And before anyone thinks that maybe this is simply some sort of typo or error made in the creation of this report, I can almost guarantee you it's not. Sergeant Nicholson flew over the search area with the deputies to show them where Carl disappeared. He showed them Horse Camp. He showed them Lake Helen. He told them that the search and rescue is concentrating mainly on the wooded area below where Landers was last seen. The problem is, Carl did not disappear anywhere near the tree line.
That has to have been on purpose so that nobody would find the crime scene at their actual second campsite. A lot of these missing 411 cases feel like they could have been solved if only the police had done the correct thing right from the beginning. And this seems like a perfect example of a case where the police intentionally did the wrong thing so that we could not find the answer. And another very uncomfortable reason that people go missing that tends to get underreported by the police and misrepresented by the media is that there's a huge human trafficking issue in a lot of areas in the United States and Australia and even Canada. David Paulides would suggest that the high frequency of missing people's cases in specific regions makes it more likely that the cause of these missing people is a supernatural cause. But I think that a more likely explanation for why there's a high frequency of missing people in specific regions is because there's either some sort of a serial killer or some sort of a regular operation running out of that region. Byron Bay in Australia is a really good example of a place that has a high frequency of missing people that seems to be totally unexplained. There's this one story of a kid that went to a bar with 3 friends that he met at a hostel. And even though he only had 2 drinks, the bouncer kicked him out of the bar by himself. He ended up wandering around town completely alone, and his cell phone record shows that even though he was heading back to his hostel, he randomly changed direction and ended up walking to the north end of town where there's some homeless encampment. And then from that location, he changed speed to like 7 miles per hour, which is a very brisk walk for someone that's been wandering around all night. And then he ends up disappearing at a national park, and all they find there is his hat. More than likely, he was human trafficked, and he probably never made it to that conservation area or to that national park, and was instead scooped up when he went to that homeless encampment. And then whoever it was that took him, took his phone and his hat, and then dumped them at the national park to make it look like that was his last location. No foul play was discovered in that. Nobody ever asked the bartender or the bouncer why they kicked that kid out of the bar by himself. There's a lot of people that you could ask that are probably involved in this human trafficking ring, and they just didn't do it. So what does that suggest? The police probably already know. And the most uncomfortable issue to bring up when talking about missing people is that the reason that the police are misreporting it is because sometimes the police are in on it. Sometimes the police are helping to either disappear these human traffic victims or cover up something that they know is nefarious but fits within the rules or jurisdiction of some club that they're a part of. I know this is uncomfortable, but I feel like people forget, very conveniently forget, that the mob operates through a lot of different police forces, and the bigger and more powerful the police force is, the more likely that there's a mob connection to at least one part of that police force. Corrupt criminal police operate in most major cities. So if the mob wants to disappear someone, they can use the police to do that. The Joaquin Phoenix film, You Were Never Here, is a perfect dramatization of this issue. The specific events that are depicted in the film are fiction, and it's really more of a character drama. But I promise you that the way that they depict this issue, the seriousness of it, it's exactly like that in real life. It's exactly that serious. When you try to lump all of these mysterious missing people's cases together as if they're one phenomenon, it can seem like maybe something supernatural is going on. But when you break down each case individually, you get the opposite problem where Occam's razor basically forces you to accept that it's more likely something natural happened to these people that we just haven't figured out. Occam's razor basically makes it impossible for us to speculate and elaborate with wild explanations for these missing people's cases. Occam's razor basically forces you to say it had to have been a rock, it had to have been a bear, it had to have been a fall. It had to have been water. Trying to conclude that there's an entire group of people that are in on this, that know what's happening, and are even maybe participating in the disappearance of these people, it forces you to assume too much. It forces you to assume things that we have no evidence for. It forces you to come up with too much circumstance and too much evidence than you can possibly find in a giant, massive national park that doesn't have security cameras everywhere. To be able to prove that some of these fit into the category of intentional conspiracy would force us to actually catch these people doing this in the act. So good luck with that. And also, even if you did find a little bit of evidence to prove this, people would never want to believe that a system or a network like this could even exist in the first place. And it would be hard to get them to accept that as a possibility. It's really uncomfortable for people to even imagine that it's possible that humans could be capable of operating in such an evil, nefarious way, secretly behind our backs. And calling something like this out would only put a giant target on your back. But Occam's razor is going to fail when you try to combine some of these similar cases together, and you realize that they're all falling through the exact same cracks. And that's one of the places that human nature fails you. When something falls through the crack, you'd rather look everywhere around except down that crack. Something about that makes you very uncomfortable. None of you ever want to see what's down that crack. You'd rather assume it's Bigfoot or aliens or interdimensional portals, or there's a cloaked predator creature hunting people in the woods. Fuck off. What the fuck? This essay on its own probably seems a bit disjointed, and I didn't really prove any of the statements I made. I'm really looking forward to, in the future, going over more individual missing 411 cases where I can show you examples of where I think that these things are playing out. So it's going to be a lot of fun going over missing 411 cases in the future when I'm still alive and well and no harm has become of me. It'll be interesting.